Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 4 at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to ISM Raceway in Phoenix. Now this is a track where it's a bit of a contradiction for me. I am not very good at this track, but I absolutely love racing it. I love the differences that you see between turns 1 and 2 and turns 3 and 4. And of course, the recent reconfiguration makes things that much more interesting. Now, for today's video, we're only going to be looking at the Cup cars, but as always, there's no reason why the information we're going to talk about can't transfer into Xfinity and Trucks. One of the big changes for the physics in NASCAR Heat 4 is the addition of tire wear. Now, tire wear is going to have a huge effect on the setup that you're running, so it makes sense that we need to, before we get into setup discussion, talk a little bit about the options that I use while I'm testing for these setups. So we'll start off in the options menu under the gameplay tab, and then we're going to scroll down to tire wear and fuel consumption. Normally I do this on 2x. I don't like to go any higher because I do like long green flag runs, but I understand that some of you like to go all the way up to 4x. Player tire wear rate, I like more wear. I like maximum tire wear, so I generally test on more wear and less grip under the grip fall off. So keep that in mind. If you're playing with different settings such as less wear and more grip, then that's going to change the setup that you're going to want to use in the races. So keep that in mind as we're talking about setups. What I'll try to do in each video is let you know the particular settings, because I don't go for maximum tire wear at every track, just where I feel that it is appropriate. And also keep in mind on the driving tab, there is a setting that you'll need to match up for the AI. So if you want maximum tire wear, then you need to have that on both the player car and the AI car. Or if you're going for less tire wear and more grip, then change that for the AI as well. Before we jump into the setup discussion, let's first talk a little bit about the track itself. Now, Phoenix, much like other heavy braking tracks and short tracks in general, there is a lot of control that you have as the driver over how the car drives and how the tires wear. What I'm going to show you as far as the setup here in just a moment is more of a baseline setup. You can adjust it more for speed, and you certainly need to adjust it more for the long run if you're one of those folks that likes to use the aggressive tire wear and tire fall off settings. But some examples on how you can change the handling of the car without ever touching the setup. If you drive the car harder into the corner, generally that is going to wear out the right front more, unless you're loose on corner entry, and then you can really heat up that right rear. So adjusting how deep you drive into the corner and whether or not you're braking in a straight line, or if you're trying to brake as you're turning into the corner, all of those things can have a big effect on how the tires wear, which of course will affect your long run speed. Also, the two ends of this track are very different. What is now turns 1 and 2 after the reconfiguration recently is a much wider, flatter area of the track. So anything you do to help on that end of the track may not help when you get back over to turns 3 and 4. So just keep that in mind. 3 and 4 has more banking and is a little bit tighter corner and a little bit harder for me to get through, actually. I mentioned earlier in the video that this is not a track where I consider myself to be very good at all, so keep that in mind as we're moving along. But always remember that there is a lot you can do in how you drive the car, and that's very important during the race. Now, in practice sessions, obviously, you have a lot of time that you can come in and make adjustments and try out a lot of different things, but during the race, there's not a whole lot you can change depending on how many pit stops you're going to be making. So paying attention to how you're driving the car and making some adjustments to your corner entry when you're getting back to the throttle and so forth can really help to preserve your tires. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we're only going to be talking about the Cup cars today, but there's no reason why this can't serve as a baseline for both Xfinity and the Trucks as well. Both of those lower series tend to run tighter for me than the Cup cars, so overall I would be looking to loosen this car up as I moved into the other two series. Getting started off with the shock settings, I wanted to show you guys something a little bit different here. I get a lot of questions about dialing in the shock, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. sort of dip our toe into it a little bit, if you will. Starting at the front, on the left front, we're at 10-13, whereas on the right front, we're at 7-13. Now, I decided to leave both of the rebound numbers the same because I wanted to highlight the difference in the left front bump setting versus the right front setting. Here, the left front is a little bit higher number, from 10 to 7, just so that I can get a little bit more left front contribution on corner entry. This is going to help under braking, give that left front tire a little bit more pressure on it so that you hopefully can free the car up on entry and get it to turn as much as you need it to turn. As we talked about just a moment ago, though, how you drive the car, how deep you drive it into the corner, as well as whether you're braking in a straight line or trying to brake as you begin your turn on corner entry, all of those things are going to have a big effect on the car, so keep that in mind. The right front bump goes from 7 simply because I wanted a little bit lower number here to put more pressure on the left front versus the right front, relatively speaking, based on these settings. If the car is too loose on corner entry, one of the options you have is simply increase this right front bump number and or decrease the left front. So you can make a pretty nice change by going from something like 10-7 to something like 7-10 or 7-12. That can certainly tighten the car up on corner entry. So the higher the right front bump you use, the tighter the car will be, particularly on corner entry. The higher the number you use on the left front bump, then that's generally going to free the car up on corner entry. Now moving to the rear of the car, you can see the same thing here. I kept the rebound the same on both of the shocks, just so that I could highlight the difference between the left rear bump and the right rear bump. Here, once again, you can see the left side is higher than the right side because this will tighten the car up on corner exit. Whenever you get back to the throttle, this is going to put a little bit more pressure on the left rear as opposed to the right rear. So if the car is too tight, then you have a couple of options. The car's too tight on corner exit, you can simply drop the left front bump, the left rear bump a few clicks and increase the right rear bump. That will certainly free the car up. On the other hand, if you find that, if we go back to more of what we were looking at before, if you find that the car is too loose already, then simply increase this left rear a few clicks and or decrease the right rear a few clicks and see how big of a difference that makes and how much that might help you when you get back to the throttle, particularly at a place like Phoenix where you're going to be into the throttle pretty hard on corner exit fairly early in the corner. So the shocks will give you a good way to adjust the feel of the car and can really make a difference in how the car drives over the course of a long run. Moving on to the weight settings, I wanted to provide a stable baseline here, so I'm using a little bit higher number on both the front weight and wedge. The wedge number at 54%, max is at 55%, so we're very close to the max here, and that's to keep the car stable. It's to control the rotation and the speed of the rotation of the car. If the car is too tight, simply lower this number. Try about 53.5 or maybe down to 53.0, and that will certainly help the car to rotate quicker. Front weight, I usually use more for adjusting corner entry and keeping stability on corner entry. So this higher number at 51.5% will help the car to be a little bit tighter and more stable on corner entry. If you're having trouble getting the car to turn, one likely scenario is you've got a little bit too much front weight in it, or you're driving the car too deep into the corner and you're basically overrunning your braking capacity. So keep that in mind. There's ways to change your driving style versus the setup and achieve very different results in some cases. So once again, the higher the number you use here on the front weight, the tighter the car will be, particularly on corner entry, and the lower the number you use on front weight, it will help the car to rotate, particularly on corner entry. Moving on to the spring settings, 1,200 pounds in the left front, 1,100 pounds in the right front. A little bit less right front spring than left front, just to help the car to turn on corner entry. If you're finding that the car is a little too tight on corner entry, then try dropping this right front spring 50 or 100 pounds, and that should certainly help the car to rotate on entry. Now, on the other hand, if you're finding that the car is too loose on corner entry, then try doing something like this, which is to reverse the front springs and use a stiffer right front spring as opposed to the left front. That will tighten the car up on corner entry and under heavy braking, which you're certainly going to be doing some of at Phoenix. Moving on to the rear of the car, 500 pounds in the left rear, 550 in the right rear. Certainly not something I would want to use for a long run with very aggressive tire wear and fall off settings. So keep that in mind. You'll want to reduce the left rear and right rear springs probably at least 100 pounds each, if not more. So you're looking at something like 400 and 450 at least if you're using the more aggressive tire wear and fall off settings. But 50 pounds of split between the rear tires seems to be a pretty good number for me at Phoenix. If you use more split in the rear springs, such as 100 pounds of split, 600 as opposed to 500 on the left rear, that's going to make the car freer or looser on corner exit and under throttle. So keep that in mind. You can make adjustments here. Generally for a long run setup, I like to be at around 50 pounds or less. Sometimes even 20 or 30 pounds is what I will use for a long run setting using those aggressive tire wear and fall off settings. Moving on to the tire settings, 13 pounds on the left sides, 33 and 32 on the right sides. Plenty of room for adjustments here, but just keep in mind, treat the tire pressure settings the same as you would the springs. And what I mean by that is, if you are a little bit too loose on corner entry, then increase the right front tire pressure. If you're too loose on corner exit, then drop this right rear tire pressure, and you can certainly change how the car is handling just using the tire pressure. But generally what I try to do is get a good baseline for the tire pressures and let you guys adjust to your personal preferences from there. But you do notice that in general, I will use a little bit more pressure in the right front as opposed to the right rear, and that is just to help to stabilize the car, particularly on corner exit, and give it just a little bit more grip. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings, +3 and -3 on the camber, left front and right front. You can certainly use more camber here. I tested using +5 and -5. That was certainly working just fine for me. And you can certainly also use less camber than this. Go down to something like 2 and 2, or maybe even something like 2 and -1.5. All of these numbers will work. It just gives you a little bit different feel and a little bit different grip out of the front tires. And obviously we're trying to maximize the grip in the front tires, so keep that in mind. Putting too much camber actually in the front tires can overheat the tire and have you losing grip. So just be careful with the amount of camber you're using. Just find a good adjustment that seems to work well for you, particularly over the long run. Front sway bars at 1.315, which is pretty standard for me here in Heat 4. But if you need to tighten up the car overall, if the car is just rotating too much, then increase the front sway bar by 1 or 2 clicks, and that will certainly tighten up the car and stabilize it overall. On the other hand, if you need the car to rotate more, then drop this front sway bar by a click or 2, and that will certainly help out with that condition as well. So a lot of adjustability just using that front sway bar. Moving on to the track bar here, I've got 12 inches on both the left and right side. However, I've tested with a higher left side than right side, simply because I wanted a couple of things. If you need more help on corner entry, you need the car to turn better on corner entry, then a higher left side number will help with that. The right side track bar is more for corner exit, and the lower the number you use here, the more it will tighten the car up on corner exit. And then of course, the opposite is also true. The higher you get this number, the more it's going to free the car up on corner exit and help the car to rotate. Brake bias is something I played around with a little bit more at this track. and found that a higher number than I would typically use actually worked out pretty well here. The brake bias, normally I use somewhere between 70 and 75, and that will also work here. But I found that going up to around 77 or 78 or so really helped the car under heavy braking. It helped to stabilize the car, in addition to all the other settings that we've already talked about, from springs and shocks and so on. So keep that in mind. You can use a little bit higher brake bias here under heavy braking, and it will work just fine. With the brake bias, the higher the number you use, generally the tighter the car will be, because you're using more front brake as opposed to rear brake. The lower the number you use on brake bias, if I drop this down to something like 72, then that's going to loosen the car up because we're putting more rear brake in it. It's going to want to rotate more under heavy braking. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of adjustability here to change how the car is handling based on the way you're driving it. For example, if you are someone who likes to really drive it hard into the corner, then maybe a little bit higher brake bias number will work better for you and keep the car more stable, since you're going to be on the brakes harder and quicker than someone who eases the car, more floats it into the corner. Grill tape, I spent very little time working on. 40% did not overheat the car, and that was pretty much the only thing I cared about. So this is by no means the most aggressive that you can likely get with grill tape, but as we've talked in the past, it really doesn't have any effect, unfortunately, on how the car handles, so there's no real reason for me to get ultra aggressive with it. Wheel lock and steering offset at what I would consider my defaults for Heat 4, 10 degrees on the wheel lock and 0.05 on the steering offset. The steering offset, main thing is just don't get this number too high. This number will change based mainly on your camber settings. The more camber you use in the front tires, the more steering offset you're generally going to want to use. But if you get this number too high, you can actually introduce a pull to the right on the straightaway, which can be very disconcerting on corner entry and make the car unstable. So just be careful about getting this number too high, but anywhere 0.1 or less should be, in general, pretty okay. Moving on finally to the gear settings. Didn't spend a whole lot of time with first through fourth. Pretty standard numbers here with some adjustability there. Normally I like to use a little bit lower number here, somewhere around a 1.4 or a 1.5 in third gear. But again, that's only going to come into play if you're trying to shift during the lap. You'll want to adjust the gearing for third gear, or if you are really concerned about your acceleration on a restart. So a lot of adjustability here, particularly in third gear, just depending on whether or not you want to shift. I did not practice shifting here. It's certainly possible, particularly as the tires wear and you lose grip there, then shifting can definitely come into play, but it's just more of a matter of personal preference and how much shifting you want to do over the course of a run. Finally, the rear end ratio at 389 is about the highest number I would want to use here. You can go maybe a little bit higher, but you're getting very close to that rev limiter, particularly on new tires and more of a qualifying trim scenario. As we've talked about in other videos, increasing the number here for rear end ratio, going from say a 389 up to a 4.0, will increase the number of RPMs the engine is turning, and at the same time, it is going to make the car looser under throttle because you're going to be applying more torque to the rear end. If I drop the rear end ratio to 382 or 375, something along those lines, then I'm going to drop the RPMs and tighten the car up under acceleration. So as always, there are plenty of possibilities in how you can adjust the car, even just focusing on one single section. So keep that in mind as you're looking to adjust for not only the Cup cars, but also in Xfinity and Trucks. That's going to do it for today. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 4.